The city of Zangara was once the pride of the nation, a bustling metropolis where the streets hummed with promise and opportunity. Its skyline, a glittering symbol of progress, stretched toward the heavens. But beneath the gleaming exterior lay a rotting core, a festering pit of corruption, crime, and betrayal. The people of Zangara lived in the shadows, where the powerful ruled with an iron fist, and the weak were crushed underfoot. As the sun set behind the towering buildings, casting long shadows over the cracked pavements, the streets of Zangara came alive with a darker kind of energy. The bustling markets, once vibrant with laughter and trade, were now teeming with fear and desperation. Vendors whispered of politicians who had stolen from the people, of families torn apart by greed, and of lives ruined by the city's descent into chaos. Ade, a young journalist with fire in his heart, weaved through the streets, his eyes darting nervously. In his bag, he carried a USB drive filled with evidence that could topple the most powerful men in Zangara, men whose hands dripped with blood and money. Ade had uncovered the truth, but in a city like Zangara, the truth was dangerous. The government officials of Zangara sat in luxury, their mansions nestled in the hills above the slums. Governor Bello, a man whose face was plastered on every billboard promising change and prosperity, sipped from a glass of expensive wine, his eyes devoid of any true concern for the people. Behind him, his cabinet spoke in hushed tones about the latest bribe that would secure their wealth. Down below, in the bowels of the city, politicians traded favors in smoke-filled rooms, deals sealed not with handshakes but with envelopes stuffed with cash. Nepotism was the lifeblood of Zangara's elite. The poor were left to rot, while the rich feasted on their labor, handpicking their family members to sit in seats of power, further tightening the noose around the neck of the city. On the streets, a different kind of deal was being made. Women, forced by circumstance, sold their bodies to survive. Amora, a woman once filled with dreams of becoming a nurse, now stood on a corner near a decaying building, her hollow eyes telling the story of thousands in Zangara who were left behind by a system designed to exploit them. She looked out at the passing cars, hoping for a customer, feeling the sharp sting of shame with every transaction. Meanwhile, across the city, the younger generation was being groomed for a life of crime. Cultism thrived in the dark alleys, where young men like Tond, fresh out of school with no job prospects, were lured into secret brotherhoods. Promises of power, protection, and wealth were dangled before them, but these promises came with a cost, one that Tond would soon realize was paid in blood. In Zangara, the internet was a new kind of battlefield. Yahoo boys, as they were called, were young men who turned to internet fraud to escape the poverty that gripped the city. But some had taken it further. Yahoo Plus, a darker and more sinister version of the scam, involved ritual sacrifices and dark magic to enhance their fortunes. Delhi, once a promising student, now sat in a dimly lit cybercafe, his fingers flying across the keyboard. His eyes, once bright with ambition, were now cold and calculating. Beside him sat an older man, a spiritualist who promised him great riches if he followed the dark rituals. Delhi looked at the photograph of his latest target, a foreign businessman, before reaching for the strange herbs on the table. As the city slept, another threat lurked in the shadows. Kidnappings had become rampant in Zangara. No one was safe, not even the wealthy. In the dead of night, black vans without license plates roamed the streets, snatching people off the sidewalks. Innocent children were taken, their parents left with nothing but ransom demands. Ade, still carrying his evidence of government corruption, became a target. As he made his way through the dark streets, a van pulled up behind him. Two masked men leaped out, grabbing him before he could scream. He fought back, but the chloroform took hold, and the world went dark. In a dimly lit warehouse on the outskirts of Zangara, Ode woke up, bound to a chair. His head throbbed, and his vision blurred. Standing before him was a face he knew all too well, Femi, his childhood friend and fellow journalist, the one person he thought he could trust. "I'm sorry, Ode," Femi muttered, avoiding his eyes. "They made me do it. They have my family." Ade's heart sank. The one person he thought was on his side had betrayed him. The USB drive with the evidence was gone, and with it, his hope of exposing the truth. Femi stepped back as the men who had taken Ode moved in, ready to silence him forever. As Ode struggled for his life, the city of Zangara reached a breaking point. Protests erupted in the streets as the people, fed up with corruption, crime, and poverty, marched toward the governor's mansion. Fires burned in the streets, and the sound of gunfire echoed through the city. Amora, Tond, and Delhi, each lost in their own struggle, were caught in the chaos. The once proud city of Zangara was now a war zone, its people fighting against the very system that was meant to protect them. Just as Ode prepared for his fate, a group of underground activists, led by a fierce woman named Zoe, broke into the warehouse, guns blazing. They overpowered Ade's captors, freeing him from the chair. Zoe handed Ode the USB drive, her eyes burning with determination. "Let's expose the truth," she said, her voice resolute. Together, they raced toward the city's radio tower, where Ode planned to broadcast the evidence of corruption to the world. The streets were still in chaos, but now there was hope, a spark of rebellion that could ignite a revolution. The city of Zangara was broken, but in its shadows, a new light had begun to shine. The people, once silent and afraid, were ready to rise. The fall of Zangara's corrupt government was swift and brutal. In the wake of Ade's broadcast, the evidence of years of embezzlement, bloodshed, and political manipulation spread like wildfire through the streets. The very men who had once held the city in their iron grip were now scrambling to flee. But there was nowhere to run. Governor Bello, the face of deception and greed, tried to disappear into the night. His mansion, once a symbol of luxury and power, was now surrounded by the same people he had betrayed. As he packed a suitcase of stolen wealth, the voices of the angry mob grew louder. His heart raced, knowing that his past had finally caught up with him. He had been the king of Zangara, but now, he was nothing more than a haunted man. One by one, the corrupt politicians who had sold their souls for power were brought to justice. Their faces, once plastered on billboards promising change, were now flashed on every screen in the city, but this time, the message was one of accountability. The people had risen, and the reckoning had begun. The politicians' downfall, the first to fall was Senator Okochukwu, who had funded his lavish lifestyle through bribery and extortion. As he tried to slip out of the city in a convoy of armored vehicles, the people of Zangara blocked the roads. There was no escape. The crowd surged forward, pulling him from his car, and though justice was fierce, it was delivered by the courts and not by the mob. One by one, the powerful elite were dragged from their ivory towers and made to answer for their crimes. The courts were filled with trials, each one revealing new depths of the corruption that had plagued Zangara for so long. Every dirty deal, every betrayal, Every life lost at the hands of those who ruled with greed was laid bare for the world to see. For the first time in years, the people saw justice, true, uncorrupted justice. The prostitute's redemption. Amora stood on the same street corner she had haunted for years, but tonight was different. The city had changed, and so had she. As the government crumbled, so too did the shadowy networks that exploited women like her. The brothels and their corrupt owners were exposed, and those who had preyed on the desperate were arrested. Amora, along with others, found safety in new shelters set up by the citizens themselves. Here, she met people who offered her more than a temporary escape. They gave her a chance at a new life. With tears in her eyes, she looked out at the dawn breaking over the city and realized that the nightmare was finally over. She enrolled in a program to become a nurse, reigniting the dream that had once seemed impossible. Other women followed her lead, turning away from the darkness they had been trapped in. Zangara was no longer a place of broken promises, and the women who had once been silenced were now finding their voices. The fall of the Yohu boys. Delhi had always known that the path he was on would lead to ruin, but he had never expected it to happen so quickly. The cybercafes, once filled with laughter and fraudulent schemes, were now raided by authorities, armed with evidence provided by its team. Delhi and his fellow Yohu boys scattered, but there was no escaping the consequences of their actions. For some, like Delhi, capture was swift. They were thrown into prison, their illusions of invincibility shattered. Others, those who had delved deeper into their cult, found themselves facing an even darker fate. Strange and unexplained deaths began to haunt the circles of the Yohu Plus operators, mysterious illnesses, bizarre accidents, all seemingly tied to the dark rituals they had practiced. In the end, the evil they had summoned claimed them, leaving nothing but hollow shells behind. The end of the kidnapping syndicates. The kidnapping syndicates, long feared by the citizens of Zangara, were finally brought to their knees. The black vans that had once prowled the streets at night were impounded, and the leaders of the syndicates, men who had operated in the shadows for years, were dragged into the light. It was the courage of ordinary people, shopkeepers, teachers, and laborers who provided the crucial information that led to their capture. The trials were swift, and the punishments harsh. The men who had stolen children, who had terrorized families, were sentenced to life in prison. Their reign of fear finally ended. For the first time in years, the streets of Zangara were safe again. Children played in the parks without fear of being snatched away, and parents could breathe easy. Bravery and the citizens' revolution. In the heart of Zangara, a new spirit was born. The people, once afraid to speak out against their oppressors, were now united by a common purpose: to rebuild their city, their home. Ordinary citizens became heroes. Zoe, the fearless leader of the underground movement, led the charge in restoring order. She, along with Ode, organized community meetings, empowering people to take control of their own futures. Volunteers rebuilt schools, hospitals, and markets. Neighborhoods that had once been overrun by crime were transformed into safe spaces where people could thrive. The youth, once lured by cults and crime, were given opportunities to work and learn. Zangara was no longer a city of shadows, but a city of light. The new government and the dawn of hope. With the old government dismantled, a new one rose from the ashes, formed by leaders chosen by the people. This new government was committed to transparency, to justice, and to providing for the needs of every citizen. Job creation was at the top of the agenda, and soon, factories, schools, and businesses reopened, offering employment to those who had been left behind for so long. The unemployment crisis that had once driven so many to crime was addressed head-on. Young men like Tond, who had once been drawn into cultism, now found work in construction, in technology, in agriculture. The energy that had once fueled destruction was now being used to rebuild. Ade, now a respected figure in Zangara, continued his work as a journalist, but this time, his stories were filled with hope. He documented the rebirth of the city, the transformation of its people, and the promise of a brighter future. Zangara, once broken by corruption, now stood tall, a beacon of hope in a world that had forgotten its potential. The streets were alive again, not with fear, but with laughter, with the sounds of children playing, with the hum of industry. The skyline that had once been a symbol of decay was now a testament to resilience. The city of Zangara had been given a second chance. Its people had fought for it, and now, they were ready to build something better. A city reborn, as the sun set once more over Zangara, it did so on a city transformed. The air, once heavy with despair, was now filled with hope. The people of Zangara, scarred by their past, had emerged stronger, united in their vision for a better future. The corrupt had fallen, and the innocent had risen. And as the new generation looked toward the future, they knew that Zangara would never again fall into darkness. The city had been reborn, and with it, a new era had begun. The city of shadows was no more. In its place stood the city of light.